Welcome back to the Wardrobe of Woe, and I am back. I feel a little bit better after my stint of sickness yesterday and the day before, but we're back and we're here with another Learning to Play Age of Sigmar video, where we're going to be talking about how to build your army or how to build your list. Um, and this is probably one of the more fundamental skills to have, and we'll be going through the basics of it and a few advanced topics. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to add to this list building commentary, feel free to put that in the comments down below, but let's get started. So first off, the best thing to start with is how big do you want to go? I recommend 1,000 points because that is where um, the armies are small but still balanced enough, and then go from there. And kind of to tack onto this, a fun alternative game mode or playstyle that me and my local group does is a 2v2, where each player brings about 1,000 points, and it's like a team game. It's tons of fun, really easy to play, and the fact that each player only has to have 1,000 points, if you have some buddies who are just looking to try it and to get into it, the barrier to entry is a lot shorter because 1,000 points is easier to get to than 2,000 points. If you're looking for a goal to shoot for, 2,000 points is where I would say a good goal to have a standard army. That's where most tournaments are set at, as well as standard Age of Sigmar games. 2,000 points is also where the game is balanced around. You'll see in 1,000 point games, some armies are kind of significantly powerful, whereas in 2,000 points, everything is more or less evenly matched. Um, so when you're starting your army, I would say the best thing to do is start with a concept. Is there a single unit in your faction that you just absolutely love the lore of, the look of, or the rules of? Or is there just something that you want to explore in your army, kind of make it unique or make it yours? Um, Age of Sigmar is pretty well balanced, and if you have, and you can make any concept work if you try hard enough. Um, I am a proponent of the rule of cool. I would say before you purchase any models or starting lists, try to find what models you think look awesome and what models you think look cool. Because you're not going to have a good time painting models or playing with models you don't like the look of or you don't like the feel of. Something else to consider is what playstyle does this army follow? So kind of an example, I personally own 2,000 points of Daughters of Cain, and it is an entirely snake army. I have one elf model, and that is the Slaughter Queen on Cauldron of Blood, but I've converted that to be a snake as well. So I really like the Melusies and the snake models for the Daughters of Cain, and I wanted to build my army around that, and luckily that's kind of where my army ended up. Next is Battleline. Battleline is important because it is a flat-out requirement to have a valid list. That's kind of why I've been making the Battleline videos, is because they are always going to be required, and it's a good thing to know what each Battleline is useful for. So when you have your concept, pick out a Battleline unit or two from your faction that you think would fit in your concept, or that you could potentially convert to fit in your concept. Regardless, Battleline is always required for match play. If you saw in the previous two slides that a 1,000 point game requires at least 2 units of Battleline, a 2,000 point game requires 3. And many factions have special conditional Battleline that needs a certain prerequisite to be considered a Battleline, but oftentimes those are a bit more specialized or have a little bit of a different vibe to go with. And then after you have your Battleline, I would look at heroes and leaders. Heroes and leaders are very important in Warhammer, or excuse me, Age of Sigmar, and they often fill vital roles in your army. Some roles that I can think of off the top of my head are one-man armies, either the magical or martial variant, force multipliers, or buff sticks. So an example of a one-man army is Nagash. He's pictured here. Nagash, the Supreme Lord of Undeath, is a magical one-man army. In third edition, his ability to just repeatedly cast Arcane Bolt and then just unload them on whatever he gets into combat with is incredibly deadly. Nagash is really powerful, and I consider him a magical one-man army. An example of a martial one-man army would be Archaon the Everchosen. He is super strong in melee. He has some magical abilities, but his whole focus is getting into combat and just slaughtering stuff. Force multipliers are units that make the surrounding units or your entire army better in general. So an example of this would be a Cauldron of Blood for Daughters of Cain. It is just a large model that you want in the center of your army that gives out various different auras and can do different things. So it makes the other units in your army worth more. And that's a very broad term of force multiplier, but generally speaking, they're just units that make other units better. Buff sticks tend to be smaller or lower cost heroes that have one particular buff or spell or command ability that their whole point is to get that off. And they can be pretty specific. So an example would be, to go back to the Daughters of Cain example, the Melusi Iron Scale, her command ability is fantastic to just guarantee that the Blood Sister or Blood Stalker unit that you have selected to buff gets where they need to go, and it just really amps that unit up. So think of a buff stick as kind of a smaller or more concentrated force multiplier. Now on to some advanced topics. So synergy. This is really important to making a really unique list. What makes a good list is synergy between each unit, as well as optional rules like subfactions. I'll be trying to flesh out my subfaction videos for each faction, but really subfactions are considered optional rules. But if you want you want a really good list, you want to use a subfaction. Certain subfactions are for specific units, or they just do specific things. And if your list doesn't synergize well with your subfaction, it's gonna kind of lead to some clashing, or it won't be as optimal. A good list will have each unit feeding off of the other unit's strengths or weaknesses to either cover your bases to make sure that your weaknesses aren't going to be the reason you lose, that you can kind of account for the weaknesses of your units, or they can kind of play off of their strengths and win, really. So synergy is very important when talking about a list. Do these units work well together? Do they have certain rules that if X unit is near another unit, do they get a certain buff, etc.? It's very broad, but generally speaking, if your list has synergy within itself, then it's a good sign. Next up is subfactions. So most armies have subfactions, I think. Before the Wrath of the Everchosen, Nurgle didn't have any subfactions, but Nurgle has some now. Subfactions are fantastic. They can make or break an army. They provide army-wide abilities as well as unique artifacts and command traits to further augment your army. And another thing is they're great for lore hounds. If you want to build a fluffy army or something that, like, say, this army is built around this subfaction and this is where they come from in the lore, or this is this army's ideals. So if you are into like role playing and really digging into building a story around your army and your models, subfactions are a great tool. And I think the new Stormcast book has rules to make your own subfactions or your own, like, I think they're called storm keeps or storm chambers. I'm not very familiar with Stormcast. I'll have to read into it now that it's been released, but subfactions are very important to at least consider. Last up, we have the advanced topic of building tall or building wide. So when you're building your list, it's important to decide which of these two sub play styles really you want to go for. So building tall is where you have a few heavily reinforced units versus building wide, which is you have a bunch of small units. And when I say reinforced or small, that's like a lot of models in a few units or a few models in a lot of units. If you play 4K strategy games like Civilization or Europa Universalis or just kind of those types of games, this term is fairly, you should know what this term is. So first up we have the building tall. The pros of building tall is you have larger units, which lets you stack buffs more efficiently. So you potentially get one unit to its maximum potential with all of the various buffs that you can put on it. So it's just this is where all of your focus is in one unit. It can create 1 to 2 very scary units that can deal with most things your opponent has. But on the flip side, this is the epitome of don't put all your eggs in one basket. If this unit gets wiped for some reason, it might be a little harder for you to win that game. But I personally like to build tall. I love having 1 or 2 Death Star or Death Stack units where I just put all my buffs on it, send it in, and let it go to town. Back to my Daughters of Cain example, my Daughters of Cain Snake Army is built as tall as it could be. I have one unit of 10 Blood Sisters, and that is my hammer that I just pound at enemies with, and it can eviscerate most things that I send it at if all of my buffs land correctly. I find it to be a very satisfying playstyle. It's very risky, very high risk, high reward, but that's just kind of something you need to consider. So building wide is kind of the opposite of this. You have a lot of smaller models, or smaller units with fewer models, but you have more of them, and it lets you be a lot more flexible in your positioning and in your strategy. And it's also a lot less punishing. If one unit gets wiped out, you're not gonna lose the game. It's not the end of the world. And is also harder for your opponent to pick a unit and be like, I need to get rid of that. That is my win condition. So there's that side of it. But with cons, if you build too wide, you might be spreading your resources too thin and your units won't perform as adequately as they can. And also, so this is something to consider with certain factions, is by playing wide, you're relying on the innate power of some of your units to act independently of each other. So a real life example of this is one of my buddies in my local wargaming group plays Nurgle, and he loves Blight Kings. He likes to take a whole bunch of units of minimum squad of Blight Kings. I think at the last game we played, he took 4 or 5 minimum squads of Blight Kings, and he was very flexible. He could kind of shift his weight around wherever he needed it to be because Blight Kings are really powerful just innately. They don't need much buffing or they don't need much support. They can kind of do their own thing. Sure, it helps, and your force multiplying heroes and stuff will still work great in a wide build. It's not as efficient, let's say, as a tall build. So that's just kind of something that I was thinking of when I was making this. Just some food for thought. And that is it for this video. If you have any comments or suggestions for how other players might build their lists, please leave those down in the comments below. If you are a new player and want me to cover a aspect of Age of Sigmar or wargaming in general that is somewhat confusing to you, I'll see if I can reply in the comments or make a full-on video for you. If you enjoyed this kind of content, please leave a like and consider subscribing. This has been the War Grove of Woe, and I'll see you guys next time.